Yo, and welcome back to the Banter Boys podcast. My name is Sanji, with me is Charlie. How you doing, boy?
Doing well, thanks Sanji. Glad to be on here. Thanks for having me.
Man, thank you for accepting my random weird request. I've never slid into so many DMs on Twitter just to get a podcast series going. But yeah, looking forward to our chat. I won't ruin it for the listeners though. So let's start with a fan introduction. Tell us your name, your Twitter handle, the club that you're representing this evening, where you're from, and a little bit about what you do.
Sure thing. So my name's Charlie. I'm from Kingston, which is sort of just South London, outside London really. I can't really claim to be a pure Londoner or anything. But yeah, so supported Fulham ever since the age of around 10, I think. And just quickly getting the Twitter handle for those extra followers as well. So it's Charlie Rimmer, but without the E on Rimmer, which is unfortunately my full name. So that's sort of the reasoning behind the Twitter name. But yeah, so I've been Fulham fan ever since the age of 10, season ticket holder for the majority of that. And I dabble quite a bit in fantasy football as well. So I actually have had a couple of these sort of requests before around sort of supporting on Fulham-esque fantasy content. So yeah, happy to be here and hopefully I can add a few insights.
I'm sure you'll be fine. You probably know more than I do, right? And I mean, I don't know if I should have warned you or told you. I feel like we're basically rivals. I'm not sure if you're aware that I'm a Chelsea fan, but I don't like boasting or telling people about it too much, especially given recent events. But I'm sure we can get through this call and conversation quite well. I mean, you're a better London club than we are at the moment, anyways, right?
Yeah, I mean that was the big sort of I think positive for last season was performances against Chelsea and sort of the overall league position. Like I'm sure you'd be a bit more cocky if this was 3 or 4 years ago, but yeah, definitely a positive from last season. Although unfortunately Brentford pipped us, which was annoying. But maybe this year we'll be the top club in West London. We'll see.
Yeah, I can't wait to dig into it. All right, listeners, welcome back to another Inside Track series. For those new to it, we're basically interviewing draft managers, fan tracks mainly, but Charlie comes from an OFPL background, so this is going to be a very interesting dynamic twist on this conversation, but I'm sure we're going to be fine. But basically, we're interviewing fans that represent each of the 20 clubs in the Premier League. We've reached the 19th club. So excited to see the end of this series as well. I think everyone's benefited from massively. But yeah, if you're new to this, basically how we run these episodes is that we have 3 segments. We have a general discussion where we talk about impact of new manager or ownership. We talk about the club's previous season's performance versus new season's expectations, old system versus new systems, basically looking at the impact of new transfers, expected formation and starting 11, impact of AFCON and Asian Cup, and obviously we're going to talk about the draft side of things. I would like to pick Charlie's brain about his first pick, next 3 picks, and at least one hidden gem from Fulham. And then finally, we're going to round things off with his experience as a drafting manager. Like, does he maybe deal with draft picks? Does he look at form versus fixtures? Or maybe some of his lessons learned over his career so far? And who knows, maybe we might be able to convert him into a Fantrax playing manager. We shall see. Anyways, let's get started. So I'm going to lightly touch on Fulham's previous season. And I feel like there's not much to really touch on. So just to kind of catch listeners up to, as a reminder or refresher, if they've kind of forgotten. So Fulham ended up finishing 10th position in the table. They, I guess, defied a lot of expectations. A lot of people had doubts about them. They weren't gonna survive the Premier League. They were probably gonna get relegated. A lot of uncertainties about Mitro, Marco Silva as well. But no, listen, they started off the season with a bang, a 2-2 draw versus Fulham at home. They almost got as high as 6th position in the table. I think at one point people were starting to believe, okay, maybe Fulham might see European football by the end of the season. But whatever, still a very impressive finish at the end of the season. Much better than my club, obviously. And a few highlights, the likes of Paulinho getting the most tackles in the league, 83 of them. Also included the most yellow cards, 14 of them. Mitrovic was an absolute monster, even though he missed majority of the, I wouldn't say final third of the season. He still ended up scoring 14 goals, 2 assists. I think he also missed the most penalties, 4 of them. So I'm very curious to pick Charlie's brain on, whether or not Mitro still has them and if he's going to be at the club. But finally, also Bernd Leno, another impressive acquisition by Fulham, ended up on the second highest number of saves, 144, only behind Raya. But I'll let Charlie take away the discussion. Tell us, you guys still have Marco Silva, right? But is there anything that has changed maybe in the background club hierarchy, other coaches that maybe the average football fan isn't aware of?
So, that was a great summary. I think within sort of a minute there, you covered probably a lot of the things we'll speak about here. But in terms of like the hierarchy, so Fulham, I think quite well known actually the structure of Fulham because in the past, media fans have been quite critical of Tony Khan, who's very vocal on Twitter. So you basically have Shahid Khan, who is the chairman, and he is the businessman that bought the club, and then his son Tony is the one who sort of divides opinion, probably mostly negative with Fulham fans, just because he is very outspoken and he can sort of maybe get involved in places where you normally want football people to be, making those key decisions. Um, in recent years, especially this season, I think that has calmed down a bit. We used to sort of, and we still do, we take this sort of money ball approach to transfer strategy, right? Where there's a lot of stats going into it. But I think what you've seen now is because of Marco Silva and sort of the positive effect he's had on the club, I think he is being given more of a say in transfers. And you can see that in recent seasons. And to be honest, people that are clearly Marco Silva signings are probably some of the best players we've had in years. So I think at the moment the balance is quite good between the ownership and the sort of backroom staff. I would say that sort of the window's obviously ongoing still. We do seem to be a bit on the tighter side with money. Previously, we bought players like Anguissa, Jean-Michael Seri, for big fees. But I think, your club, Hudson Odoi, we're linked with him and we seem to be sort of haggling over 1 or 2 million, which seems crazy. But look, overall positive at the moment. And I know you said there, but Marco Silva, I think him staying is probably the most beneficial news we could have had. He is very key to not only the way we play, but I think faith from the fans. So yeah, if everyone stays that's currently here, I'll be relatively happy going into the first game.
Yeah, before we jump into transfers, I do want to touch on Frank Zambo Anguissa. Not only one of the most brilliant names I've seen in football, but look at his impact that he's had on that Napoli team as well. Their Serie A title, a great run in the Champions League as well. Do you miss a player of his quality?
I think when you look at how he's playing now and, when you were watching the Champions League over the last couple of seasons and he's just crushing games, of course, we'd love to have someone like that in our squad. He did give us glimpses of sort of what he's doing now, but it's a tough one, right? When we got promoted that season, we spent a lot of money. It was a bit of a scattergun approach. So I wouldn't ever sort of fault a player for not performing in that system. But yeah, like I look at it now and think, wow, if we had like Paulinho and Anguissa in midfield, that's like never mind top six midfield. That's like, a World Cup winning sort of midfield. So
Yeah. It would have been a beautiful dynamic to witness for sure. So, now that you've touched on Paulinho, I want to talk about some of the ins since the last summer window. João Paulinho, most tackles. Listen, he was a midfield enforcer right next to Harrison Reed, right? Do you want to maybe touch a bit more about his impact and role that he's had on Fulham? And is he currently injured at the moment? And if so, when are you expecting him back?
So yeah, I think Paulinho last season, he was definitely up there as for me being our like most important player. People obviously look at Mitrovic, but I think Paulinho got a lot of the credit that he deserves. He is just so key in breaking up play, bringing energy, and in terms of like defensive performances, I think he's right up there with the very best at the moment. So definitely key to our success last year. He picked up a knock in the preseason game against Brentford. I think I can't remember the exact name of the injury, but it's to do with his elbow. And I think, to be honest, he'll likely miss the opening game against Everton, and then hopefully he'll be back soon after that. It is definitely a worry going into the season without him. But I mean, if you had to sort of name one silver lining, it's maybe that it's fended off some of the interest from other clubs. There were a lot of teams linked with him, and again, he's another one that I'm just delighted that he looks like he'll still be a Fulham player come the start of the year.
Lovely. Yeah, I mean, listen, Chelsea are definitely in a hunt for a central midfielder. So I think a lot of teams are, even Liverpool, right? Now they're battling it out for Lavia and Caicedo. So this market has been wild, let alone the Kane saga. But we're here to talk about Fulham. Let's talk about another impressive asset that you guys acquired from Manchester United. A lot of FPL managers were quite chuffed having him up at 4.5. But again, we talk about draft. We don't talk about prices and stuff like that. So Andres Pereira had the most key passes for you guys last season with 60 of them, had the most assists, 10 of them, and chipped in with 4 goals as well. Talk about his impact.
Yeah, like we've sort of got this good habit recently of bringing in players from sort of higher clubs or players that haven't necessarily been performing at their previous clubs, and then them having sort of a resurgence. So I think Pereira is a really good example where, he came straight into the team, provided a creative outlet. He's good on the ball. He's good sort of sitting behind the striker. And yeah, set pieces, really good. So he gets, a lot of assists through that. Obviously, you mentioned his price there. I think many people had him in the standard teams last year because of that. And
Mm.
just a solid performer. I would say he dipped a bit for me in the second half of the season, so I'm hoping that he hits the ground running at the start. And there is a chance. I know you spoke about it earlier as well. Penalties. Mitrovic was obviously shocking last year, and not only in terms of minus points and all that, but just the games that he missed them in were so like they were really important penalties. So
Yeah.
I think there's a good chance that Pereira might actually be on them
Okay.
between him and Willian potentially. So, that's another thing to consider.
Yeah, so another name I want to touch on, Manor Solomon. Obviously, he's at Spurs now, but this guy seemed to only be able to score goals one way, right? Are you disappointed that he's not stayed with the club?
I'm definitely disappointed. I mean, he came at like when he joined us from Shakhtar, everyone was sort of raving about him, and he got injured very early on and sort of missed about half the season, and it felt a bit like, well, we sort of stuck by him. I know the whole sort of deal with Shakhtar and everything was, there was a sort of cloud over all of that. So it is annoying. We saw glimpses of what he's capable of, and like you say, he was sort of famous at Fulham for cutting in from that left hand side and curling them in, a bit like Robin, sort of on the
Yeah.
reverse side. So I think
Yeah.
Spurs have got themselves a good player. And yeah, I'm annoyed, and we're definitely lacking quality now on the wings, or at least depth. So I think that's one area that we're definitely likely to see sort of one or definitely one, maybe two players incoming before the window shuts.
Okay, lovely. Next name, Kevin Mbabu came in from Wolfsburg. There was a lot of high expectations, I think, from football supporters. I think having witnessed him play for Switzerland, and he didn't really break into the first team. Kenny Tete, I want to believe, kept him out, and Kenny Tete had a great season actually. So is there any chance that you think Mbabu might get more minutes?
So I think a lot of people rated Mbabu because he's apparently a pace demon on FIFA. So I think you had a lot of the Ultimate Team
Yeah.
fanboys sort of piping up. But no, when he came in, I was definitely like optimistic that he would do well. For me, Kenny Tete though is he had a great season last year, and for me he is like a really high level, definitely Premier League quality footballer. So I wasn't surprised that he kept Mbabu out. Mbabu actually went on loan, I think, at the end of last season. So
Mm.
he's come back in. He offers, backup. I think at the moment that's all he is, and wouldn't expect him to get game time unless Tete suffers an injury, which hopefully he doesn't. But that being said, I think, in Babu, he clearly fell out of favour within the team, but he's got his head down and he's still, he's not kicking up a fuss. So I sort of rate that level of commitment. You know.
Yeah, and professionalism as well, definitely. So next name, Bernd Leno, we touched on him having the second most saves last season. I think he kind of was overshadowed by David Raya's performance, really, as one of those maybe out of the top six, out of the top seven clubs to have a really top goalkeeper. But I think he quietly went about his business, and I would say he had a fantastic season.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think I've said it about everyone so far, but again, really solid performer last year and definitely up there in terms of the Fulham sort of rankings. You know, Getting a player of that quality was a real steal at the start of the season, and he definitely didn't disappoint. Calm set of hands in goal. I think he got 7 or 8 clean sheets, but in terms of like standard FPL, really solid because he picks up a lot of bonus points and gets at least sort of 4 saves a match, 4 or 5. So just really solid. And I know we don't. Last thing I'll talk about standard FPL, but obviously price point wise, he is someone that a lot of managers I'm sure will be looking at getting.
Yeah, and I mean, the way it works in Fantrax is you get 2 points per save, right? Obviously, clean sheets are nice to have. It's like 6 points for a clean sheet, but if your goalkeeper can rack up enough saves and still concede the odd 1 or 2 goals, I think you're in the green, and that's the most that anyone can really hope for, right? Unless you're like a David Raya getting 10 saves per game and the clean sheet. That is just demonic behavior. But let's move on to one of your central defenders, Issa Diop, came in from West Ham. Do you think he is Premier League quality, or would you expect, a better centre back to maybe take his spot?
So I definitely think it's Premier League quality. I mean, it's quite a weird like centre backs setup we have at Fulham because obviously we've got Tim Ream who's sort of getting on in his years and he's definitely more
Yeah.
injury prone as we've seen now. We've brought in Calvin Bassey from Ajax, formerly at Rangers, who looks like a really solid pickup to be honest. I still think Diop will be relied upon and definitely a starter. And when he first joined, he looked like a guy that hadn't had enough, game time really, and it took him a while to sort of bed into the side. But I'd say now he's solid. He's definitely got a goal in him potentially. In terms of comparison with other players in the Premier League that you can have instead, I wouldn't be ranking him that highly. But for Fulham, I think I'm optimistic that he'll have a solid season.
Yeah, and you've also got the likes of Adara Bioyo as well, waiting in the shadows for an opportunity. Another name, Levin Kurzawa. I don't think we need to touch on him too much because he was on loan from PSG, and I don't think he's at the club anymore. But yeah, another name that I thought would have made an impact in your season, but the other players seem to, I guess, see the competition and then kind of rise to the occasion.
Yeah, it was a weird one that, to be honest. Like when he came in, he's one of those players that you would have heard about before. Like obviously at PSG, I think he was at Monaco as well, where he was like he had a few really good seasons. So surprised he didn't feature more. Fulham do seem to have a track record of bringing in players that just like really don't feature. Um, but yeah, really just you wouldn't have known he was even at the club really. But yeah.
So I'm really chuffed to talk about this name, Willian. Obviously, used to be a Chelsea player. I know what he's capable of. Maybe people had their doubts him coming back a few years later, but he seemed to look as good as he was before. He knows how to beat a man. He's got a great delivery on him, great shot on him. Do you think there's a chance that he would be a nailed option as well this season? Because there was a lot of transfer drama surrounding him recently.
Yeah, so like Marco Silva and Mitro, Willian was subject to recent interest from the Saudi clubs. That was actually after he signed a contract maybe 3 weeks ago. Before that, I think Nottingham Forest were heavily linked. I mean, Willian, despite his age, he still has this incredible like turn of pace. And in terms of like taking on players, he really does,
Yeah.
get you on the edge of the seat. So, delighted to have him. I'm glad he's with us again for another year. And you can see his quality. I think he's probably a nailed on starter unless he suffers from an injury or something. But yeah, providing assists, goals, I think he'll be right up there. And in terms of Fulham players, he would be one that I would be looking when we have good spells to potentially bring in.
Okay. Is Daniel James left the club? He was only on loan with you guys, right?
Yeah, so we got him on loan from Leeds. I don't know if there was an well, there obviously wasn't an obligation to buy, but he's no longer with us. I don't think he met the uh, obligation contractual things that we had to fork out the
Yeah.
money for him.
Fair enough. Okay, and final name from that summer window, Carlos Vinicius. I thought he filled in quite well for Mitro while Mitrovic was out. But you guys got another striker recently, and I want to say another Premier League quality striker in Raul Jimenez. But in terms of Carlos Vinicius, does Jimenez's, I guess, transfer into the club impact Vinicius's opportunity for minutes and game time if Mitrovic also stays?
Yeah, I think the big question here is like the Mitro situation. Marco Silva said that he wants three strikers, like he said that a while ago. So, if Mitro does go, I think we definitely will be bringing in another like marquee striker. I would be worried if we didn't. So I think when you look at Jimenez and Vinicius currently, I'd say they're pretty level in terms of who I'd expect to start. Jimenez maybe slightly ahead. So I think Vinicius' game time will be affected, but it's still all to play for. If he impresses, he would definitely get a run in the team.
Okay. So fast forwarding to the January window from last season, what's up with Anthony Knockout, by the way? He keeps coming to the club, leaving, coming back, leaving again. Like,
I mean, you sort of got me that. I mean, I think he's left now. It's one of those players, right? For the last sort of couple of seasons, when we got him, we had to sign him when we got promoted, like obligation. And I actually don't, I can't recall because I think he left a while ago now, or at least at the start of the window's release. So might have to double check that after. But I'm thanks for his service, but I'm sort of happy to see him go just because of the financial costs
yeah,
associated with him.
definitely. Sasa Lukic came in from Torino. Tell me about this player because I feel like I don't know enough.
Yeah, so we got him. He's Serbian, so I don't know if there was a connection there with Mitra in terms of like a recommendation. But we got him from Syria. I actually forget the club, so I'm having a few blunders now with the
Oh,
old
Torino,
historical
Torino.
clubs. Torino, that's
Yeah.
the one. So it's quite difficult because when he featured last season, he was sort of forced to come in where Paulinho would usually play. So big shoes to
Mm,
fill. I don't know if he's necessarily suited to that sort of deeper role. I think he's more of an eight. So, we haven't seen much of him. I think he'll get opportunities next season. Our squad is not that big at the moment, so we're definitely going to need him in certain games. And I hope there's more to come from him.
okay. What about Shane Duffy? Is he with you guys at the moment?
So, I'm coming out with some sort of horror shows here. I think
Oh, no,
so.
no, it's
Shane
okay,
Duffy,
it's
I
okay.
don't. So we got him on loan from Brighton in January. I don't
Yeah.
think we've decided to um, continue that, like offer him a contract or anything after. I think he left as a free agent. We've got other centre backs in anyway, so Shane Duffy maybe played a few games. I don't think he featured much and was definitely just a backup option.
Okay. And final name I do want to touch on is Cedric Suarez. He came on a short loan from Arsenal. Was that just a depth signing for the rest of the season?
Yeah, that was all that was. I can't remember the club he's gone to now, but again, it was just a loan for the 6 months as cover. Really, that Kenny Tete is. There's always the worry that he'll get injured, and we don't have a ton of depth at right back. So yeah, it was just a cover signing really.
Okay, lovely. And now in the current window, yeah, I mean, really just two players to kind of touch on, right? Let's start with Calvin Bassi. I hope I didn't butcher that name, but came in from Ajax, like you mentioned as well. Centre back, I think, much needed position to fill, especially like you mentioned, Tim Ream's kind of kicking on with age and whatnot. Can we expect Bassi to be a nail starter? I saw he got his first goal for the club as well in the same game that Jimenez got his first goal.
Yeah, I mean it was great to see him score a goal. Like in a preseason game, you can't take a lot from these matches, but it's always nice when they get a goal straight off the bat. I think so. Again, it's going to be dependent on Tim Ream's injury. They're both left-footed, left centre back, so you can imagine that Bassi long term is going to fill that Tim Ream role. Tim Ream is a player that I think a couple of seasons ago most Fulham fans would have said he's not Premier League quality. Now it's
Yeah,
like, oh my god, what are we going to do without him if he's not playing? Um, so I think Calvin Bassi will eventually, fill into that role, and it's good, I guess, having someone like Tim Ream as a sort of mentor, more
yeah.
experienced player that can hopefully, yeah, mentor him and get him up to speed.
Definitely. All right, and final name, Raul Jimenez. We all know what he went through at Wolves, that traumatic head injury. He kind of struggled to recover from it. I mean, obviously, Wolves' recent years, months even, have been a quite tumultuous and time, a very weird environment that the club is under or experiencing. So I feel like he didn't have maybe the best manager or managers to kind of help him back into full fitness and seeing him go back to his best scoring run. But do you have any hope that maybe he will be able to settle with Fulham? And I mean, like we talk about Mitrovic, there's all this transfer drama, and is he gonna say, won't he stay? Is he gonna say he's gonna leave, sort of situation? Jimenez, do you think, can he fill those Mitro boots?
I mean, it's a tough ask for him to sort of like fulfill all of the goals that Mitro has been providing. I do think, I would love to see him do well and really kick on at Fulham. I'll have to see when he does play, sort of like how he fits into the team. But I think he has a lot of the attributes that we would require and that sort of do compare with what Mitro offers to some extent. I think Jimenez is very good at dropping deep. He's good in the air, and I would love to see him do well. I'll be brutally honest. Like at the moment, I would be incredibly worried if we did start the season with Vinicius and Jimenez as our only strikers. But I'll give the guy the benefit of the doubt, and I think if anything, we've seen in the last couple of seasons that Fulham has provided to be it's been a good place for players that sort of need to make a comeback and prove themselves. So it seems like a good fit.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. All right, so I mean, having gone through all these transfers and whatnot, what is your expectations for the upcoming season?
So I think it's going to be hard to sort of repeat what we achieved last season. That sort of top 10 finish, even like upper end of the mid table. I think at the moment we're definitely lacking depth. There's a number of players that I would worry if they got injured that we just don't have the numbers coming off the bench. I think if we bring in a couple more wingers, a midfielder, and sort of backup right back, left back, I would feel a lot more comfortable. At the moment, I would say sort of 13th to 15th is where I would honestly put us. But a lot can change, right? And the Mitrovic, if Mitrovic starts the first game and scores a goal, suddenly my outlook is more positive.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, the season's starting tomorrow, right? For the past few episodes, when we recorded even weeks ago, I've been telling people, okay, if the league starts tomorrow, which it does, what would be your expected starting 11 and the formation that you expect Marco Silva to roll out?
So it's a tough one with some of the injuries that we have. We don't know if Marco will roll the dice in the game against Everton away. I think sort of going through the team, we normally line up as four at the back and then sort of a three in midfield where we have sort of one sitting a bit deeper, like the standard, three-man midfield, and then two wingers. And interesting, I don't know who's gonna start out of Vinicius and Jimenez. I think Jimenez will start, but might even see Mitchell there. So going through the squad, Leno, I think Bassi will likely start over Ream unless he's sort of made a complete comeback. Then you're looking at Diop, Tete, Robinson. Midfield, so Paulinho is obviously the big question mark here, and whether we play Lukic in his place. But you're looking at sort of Lukic, Reed, and Paulinho, and then the wingers of Willian and Wilson, and then, like we said, any of the three strikers up front, all bets are off.
I mean, it sounds like you're a bit spoilt for attacking talent while the situation holds, right? So it's kind of a good thing. Have you been keeping an eye on your preseason at all? You had like a couple of mixed results, 2 wins, 2 losses.
Yeah, like I never look too much into preseason, right? Like I think level-headed, I don't want to get sort of too carried away either way, if it's positive or negative. The Brentford game, there were lots of goals. It was quite a feisty one,
Mm,
uh, quite even, and I'd say both teams had spells. The Chelsea and Villa ones, sort of less to talk about there, not great, and I think showing some of our defensive frailties. So,
mm.
you know, real mixed bag. The last one against Hoffenheim, I thought there were periods where we were really poor actually, and but it was good to see debutants get their goals and bit of confidence going into the season. So yeah, mixed review there. I don't look too much into it, and I
Okay.
hope that we'll have a few additions before we actually kick off the season.
All right, sounds good. And in terms of AFCON slash Asian Cup, I don't think you guys are affected. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So I know we've got so Calvin Bassey. I think he actually might represent Nigeria. So I'm not too sure
Mm.
actually on some of the actual national squads in terms of whether these players are getting picked. But I'd imagine some of these are in contention. Just thinking off the top of my head as well. No, I think that's it. In the past, we've had a big Nigerian contingent like Tosin Adebayo as well, but I
Yeah.
think he's probably going to leave Fulham before the season starts. So I don't think it will affect us too much, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I mean, who knows, right? Tim Ream might time his recovery just for the AFCON tournaments, right? And it'll be business like usual. So yeah, looking forward to seeing how you guys manage next season. All right. So are there any other assets that you'd like to touch on and discuss that we haven't mentioned already?
So I think the one thing I would say, right, with Fulham is I think we're definitely a form team. I think there's value to be had in purple patches where certain players are really on form or where we have a good spell. Harry Wilson is the one that sort of stands out for me, and I think a lot of Fulham fans would say the same. He had a bad injury at the start of last season, which really stifled his performance later on in the year. But I think he's when we're in the championship, he was great, and I think it's sort of got all the markings to be a really good season for him. And obviously Willian as well. I think they're the two that I would pull out as attacking threats, and then Leno that we spoke about is, I think, a really solid keeper option.
Yeah, I mean, Harry Wilson, if I remember correctly, I think he got the most key passes for you guys in the championship, in the season that you guys got promoted, and was probably one of the top players in the championship overall as well.
Yeah, 10. I think 10 goals, 19 assists, which is crazy.
Oh,
Obviously, the championship you have more fixtures and weaker
yeah.
opponents, but he had consistency there, and he has got goals in him. He scored a great goal against Brentford, and I just think there's a bit of a vacuum at the moment. If Mitrovic, whether he stays or not, right, the dynamics obviously shifted. So people like Wilson have to step up, and I hope he just, you know, takes it upon him and really performs.
All right, lovely. So now let's move on to the draft side of things. This is going to be an interesting discussion because I come up from a Fantrax background, Charlie comes from an OFPL background, but we have the same common love for the draft game, right? So, Charlie, before we get started talking about some of these assets and how to rank them, why don't you give us maybe a bit of a background as to why you play OFPL draft? How come you've never delved a bit deeper into the dark side of the game?
So yeah, I mean, I've always done the draft modes on FPL with mates, just as a way of sort of each year. I think it's a nice experience, sort of getting together, actually doing the draft, having a bit of banter as the season goes on. I have dabbled in some of the other I don't know if you know the website Fan Team, ones where
Yeah, 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 yeah.
there's more stats going into it and there's different points mechanics and things, but obviously they're over a far shorter period, so there's not that season long commitment. So I'm sort of familiar with a lot of these mechanics, but I think I'm probably put off by the sweatiness, to be honest. I think everyone has probably got about 50 Excel spreadsheets open when doing these things. And,
Yeah.
I like stats myself, but I think there's levels to it. And I don't know if I have the raw commitment to be. And I would get annoyed, right? If I did poorly in these things, it would just
Yeah.
frustrate me. So.
Yeah, I mean that just speaks levels of your how competitive you are, right? No one likes to lose at the end of the day. But yeah, definitely Fantrax I think is a bit overwhelming at first with all these numbers, all these spreadsheets. I totally get what you mean, but I think what makes it easier for managers who've been playing the game quite a while is that I think once you've got a couple seasons under your belt, good ones and bad ones, you kind of know how to kind of structure your team. Because I would say even like draft day for me, I had everything planned out, laid out, and 45 minutes before the draft, I'm like, shit, I feel underprepared. Like, how am I gonna use this sheets? Like, I'm starting to panic a little bit. And at the end of the day, like, I just, had a call with one of my mates who knows football, who talks football, and we kind of just talk things through. Like, okay, I mean, this pick makes sense. Like, we expect, let's say Liverpool to do better. Maybe their forwards might score more goals, that sort of stuff. So I think at the end of the day, like, regardless of what draft website platform you use, I think the same sort of philosophy kind of applies, right, across all levels. So let's jump into it. In terms of Fulham assets, I mean, you've kind of seen what Fantrax players look at, and you have an idea of some of the numbers some of your Fulham assets are able to put up. What would you guess would be, like, let's say the first pick from Fulham?
You mean like any position?
Yeah, any position, forward, midfield, defender, goalkeeper. Like, who would you think is maybe the first player? And like, I've got the numbers in front of me in terms of like average draft position, but I just want to still pick your brain and see like how would you go about it, sort of stuff.
Sure thing. So, like, I guess without sort of seeing like last season's exact numbers for these players, like literally just going off gut instinct, I think Harry Wilson would be up there for me just in terms of I think his potential. Obviously, there's not a ton of data on him, but he is someone that I think, yeah, we've gone through it, has goals and assists in him. Paulinho is one, again, without seeing the exact numbers, with the different mechanics that come into play here, the tackles, the interceptions, clean sheets, all of that, he's got all of that potential. So I wouldn't be surprised to see people perceive him as being a good pick just based off that headline stat that you read about the tackles. But he also has yellow cards, so I don't know how much that negates all of the positives, and suspensions and everything. But I would say
Yeah.
those two, Willian, for similar reasons to Wilson. I think, like in terms of take-ons, dribbles, ball retention, shots, goals. I think he has that experience where he doesn't give up a lot of points. And then I would say, bit of a rogue pick here, Anthony Robinson. I think potential of getting forward. He has a burst of pace. Crossing ability is not great, but he can put in the volume. So I don't know how much this is a volume versus quality thing with some of these metrics, but
Yeah.
he would be a rogue pick. And then Leno, potentially, but I don't know how he stacks up without the price factor thing.
It's very interesting. You didn't pick out two of your main attackers in Andreas Pereira and Alessandro Mitrovic.
Yeah, so I mean, Mitro, I'm like reluctant to speak. I feel like if I say anything positive, I'll open Twitter and we'll see Fab saying he's leaving. So that's probably
Yeah.
like why I'm a bit hesitant. I think with
Yeah.
Mitro, I'm like not.
Yeah.
I don't want to jinx anything, but
Yeah.
Pereira's an interesting one. I think I'm probably looking at through the lens of like he was a cheap FPL asset,
Yeah.
maybe doesn't get the attention. But now that you
Yeah.
say it, obviously I've got the metrics here in front of me, and like
Yeah.
he does tick a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
What is the sort of ranking that you've got? Does it
So at
compare?
the moment, let me rattle out some numbers because definitely Fantrax managers would want a reminder as to how you guys performed last season, and I'm gonna do a combination of the average draft position and the current and last season's performance, right? So if we look at like some of the top performers from last season, actually Bernd Leno scored the most Fantrax points of all your assets, then followed by Andreas Pereira, Alexander Mitrovic, Willian, Tete, and Robinson. So I mean, you were definitely on point with the fullbacks, the goalkeeper, like definitely great picks, right? In the end of it. If you look at maybe a points per game perspective, I think the reason Mitrovic wasn't first is because he missed that stretch of games as well, right? Because he was, I think, in the end, he was only 25 to 30 points shy of Bernd Leno. So I think he could have easily caught him, right? So if you look at a points per game perspective, Mitrovic stands tall, stands first with 11.5 points per game. Willian then came out second with 10 points per game. Pereira close to 9 points per game, then Bernd Leno, then Tete, then Robinson. So again, the names that you mentioned. What's interesting to me is that when you look from like an average draft position, the order at which the average Fantrax manager is taking these Fulham assets, Andreas Pereira goes first, Mitrovic second, Kenny Tete third, which was surprising to me because then that's followed by Harry Wilson, Willian, Anthony Robinson, and Bernd Leno. See, the thing is that in Fantrax, and it depends on the manager how they play the game, but for me, and I'm pretty sure also for you, I don't touch a goalkeeper until the latter end of my draft. Like, I try to get as much of the attacking returns, fill out my forwards, my midfielders, my defenders, and you try to touch all the premium assets as well, right? So it's very interesting that the perspective that you gave did complement what Fantrax is telling us as well, right? But I love the fact that you didn't pick Mitrovic because of the scare, because he has dropped a lot further down in several of the drafts, right? Because managers have been drafting, I want to say, over the last month, 2 months or so, right? And his position has changed based on what Fabrizio has been tweeting or what the club has been putting, what you're seeing on social media. It's the same thing with Kane as well, right? We saw like Kane would be easy, like one of the first picks in any draft, right? But now he's dropping to like the third or fourth round because managers are very hesitant to take that risk on board, because if you waste that early round pick, your season's probably going to be shit, right?
Yeah, I actually did the standard draft the other day, like 3 days ago, and we had that exact situation with Kane is obviously the big one, and then Mitro as well, like where you don't know at what point he's worth the risk versus the other players that you could get instead. So for sure, it's a curveball, and like it'll be interesting to see those people that did pick Kane. I think there's news today, right, that he is going not to divert onto Tottenham, but I think that looks like a risk that isn't going to pay off. But yeah, it's interesting, like you say there about I'm of the same opinion for sure. Like my goalies were the last spots I filled. I think there's very little difference between a lot of the keepers, especially when you don't have to consider price. And I'm not surprised to see Tete higher up there. I think a lot of my thinking comes into potential to get subbed and things and injuries. And I think that would put me off some of these players, but
yeah, definitely. So, I mean, if from a first pick perspective, I think Andreas Pereira would probably be a safe one to go with. I mean, listen, if you want to take that Mitrovic risk, managers, by all means, go for it. But just let me know how it goes, right? This is a safe space. You're allowed to slide into our DMs, cry a little bit. I will totally understand. In terms of the next three picks, I think I'll agree with Charlie. Like, you can easily go off one of Anthony Robinson or Kenny Tete, throw in the likes of Willian, Harry Wilson. I mean, even João Palhinha, right? João Palhinha, yes, he wasn't the most glamorous Fantrax asset, but he had very consistent performances in terms of like he would get 6 or 7 points per game. And it's almost like if you needed to play a midfielder, he's going to get points there and he's going to get the minutes as well. Yes, we will warn you about the yellow cards. He might miss the odd game or two, but sometimes that's the risk you have to take with certain assets. In terms of hidden gems, though, I do want to throw out maybe the likes of Raul Jimenez or even Calvin Bassey, like we talked about earlier, right? Calvin Bassey, I think, is going maybe as the 11th or 12th Fulham player. And based on our chat, Charlie, I feel like if he's able to maybe put up a similar performance to Tim Ream, he might surprise a lot of managers next season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of the Fulham decisions are going to come from like how our squad looks in those first few games. The run-in at the start is really tough. Like, we have an awful sort of set of opening fixtures. So I would say like it's going to be interesting. And I think Calvin Bassey, he definitely has the makings, right, of someone that could slot into the squad and surprise a lot of people just at how good he can be. And if he has goals in him like we saw, that's obviously a massive advantage in all of these fantasy systems, no matter what game type it is.
Definitely, 100%. All right. Before we move on, are there any other assets that you want to touch on that maybe could be a surprise package for next season that we haven't touched on?
I mean, not to go into a ton of detail, but Harrison Reed is one that, you know, he's normally like, I don't want to say like a lock on starting for Fulham, but, he's incredibly like energy driven midfielder that has actually added some goals to his game. He previously
Yeah.
didn't score. So he's one that, like form wise, if he hits that purple patch, he could surprise people. And with some of those other metrics like interceptions, tackles, I think he
Yeah.
will score highly this season. So, maybe one to watch. Don't take my advice too literally, but I think as a punt, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely love that as a punt. I mean, Harrison Reed got the third most key passes for Fulham last season with 35 of them. I mean, he's no Paulinho. He ranked fourth in tackles with 27 of them. And in terms of interceptions, he's a bit lower down, but I think what you're getting is a bit of a nailed backup option that, let's say you're scrambling for a player at the last minute, you need to fill a midfield spot in your roster. I think it's a decent plug and play, especially against maybe some of the promoted teams. So I think it's definitely worth a punt. All right, so now let's move into the final segment where we're going to pick Charlie's brain as a draft manager. Now, in the OFPL game, I don't think you have the option of doing trading draft picks and whatnot, right? But have you ever come across the concept or applied it in other platforms or other games?
I mean, I'm familiar with it in general in terms of how it works in like American sports. I guess it's similar, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know in all of these leagues that you play if you carry on from previous season, if that's the whole theme of it, right? So, like, does the pick order, is that determined by finishing position last season, or is it just like you
No,
get assigned
randomized
a
every season.
oh
Yeah.
random? Wow.
We might watch a video of like 12 random ducks racing down a river, and whoever's duck finishes what position, that's the draft order you're gonna get.
I'm sure I'd be last in the duck race, so I'm glad I'm not involved in this.
Okay, so in terms of trading with other managers, I think this is applicable on all games. What's your strategy really? Do you look at form? Do you look at fixtures? Do you look at like maybe proven, history over the past few seasons? Maybe injury records? Like what do you kind of gauge your trades by?
I mean, like, I think like a lot of people, like, I have that tier list in my head, first of all, about like, right, who are the elite players that, are going to massively swing the season for people, for managers.
Yeah.
So I've obviously got some sort of like ranking order in my head. I'm, I think if you go down the route of like trying to pick off certain fixtures and sort of have transfers or like strategy plan in your head, you really have to be detailed with it. I've
Mm.
struggled with that in the past where I'll sort of think of this creative route of where I think fixtures are going to like lie really well and then I can switch out. And I think that's fine as long as you really like stick with that and aren't swayed too easily. So I do like the fixture form
Yeah.
approach, but I think
Yeah.
you have to stick with it and not divert.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I guess I'm not. Do you have any examples that you've encountered around like picks, trades?
Well, I mean, trades for me, like, so to be honest, I've played OFPL draft quite a lot as well over the past few seasons. So in terms of me for trades, I tend to prefer maybe a two person trade, 3 person trade, because a lot of these people that make trades, like you mentioned, they try to go for the premium assets, right? And it's very hard to trade premium for premium because I feel like yes, okay, you might have like a group of let's say 10 to 20 premiums, but I think the drop off between each tiers of those premiums is quite significant, right? Like it's hard to, and especially in OFPL, like you can't trade position for position, like you can't trade midfielder for forward. You're gonna have to combine it together to make sure that it fits your roster in that sense, right? So in terms of me, like for trading, I try to make sure that it's a mutually beneficial trade, right? Obviously, like one-sided trades, I would love to do them. They would help my team. I want to win at the end of the day. But yeah, I think getting a mutually beneficial trade and trying to maybe look forward as much and again with especially now at this time of the season, I try to not trade while the transfer window is open. It's a very easy opportunity to get burnt, right? Because I'm sure there's a lot of Kane owners right now that would have tried to trade him out on a high, seeing, oh, Fabrizio says he's staying, and now today everyone who has Kane is probably trying to package him with Richarlison so that even if Kane leaves, at least you have the backup there, right? So I think making smart combinations to your trades is also a great strategy.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to be honest, like in the standard FPL draft, whenever I see two managers actually agreeing on a trade, I'm just the only question I ask is like, who is getting shafted here? Because normally these things,
Yeah,
someone is getting done, they just don't know it.
yeah,
And
exactly.
I think like most of the in the previous seasons, the winner has always been the person that has really planned ahead on the free agents that are actually worth taking, and just maintaining the squad and keeping up to date with what's coming up, like planning ahead. So, I don't put too much emphasis on these manager to manager trades because I think someone is always getting shafted. You just hope it's not you. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can you recall any of your best or worst trades in your career so far?
wow, like I think one successful one I did, I can't remember 2 seasons ago, like Son for Rashford.
Oh
I
wow.
can't
Okay.
remember. Yeah, like to be honest, in a lot of these drafts that I do, like some of them are with friends, so you sort of like a bit you entertain some offers more. Like there's a bit of
Yeah.
camaraderie around it, so it's maybe not a strategic, level-headed decision. Um, I've had some shockers in past seasons as well, though, with like having people like Cancelo and Doherty on my books. Like when they've left, and
Oh.
just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so like I tend not to get too much involved with these player-to-player transfers, but
Yeah.
yeah, they're just a couple. Couple. What about you?
Yeah, listen.
Is there one that you always mention in these calls?
Yeah, I do, and I actually mentioned it on the last call. And again, I reiterate, one of our avid listeners is the person that I made the trade with, and I hate rehashing the scab, but the trade was basically Ismail Assar for Bukayo Saka. I gave up Ismail Assar. I got Bukayo Saka. I definitely won that trade because it happened right before Sar's injury for the rest of the season. So I've never really had a bad trade. I've only had bad drafts, I want to say. But I don't think your draft determines how your season will go. Because if you are an in tune manager, you're quick on the waiver wire pickups, free agency pickups, maybe you look at like clean sheet odds, that sort of stuff, and you stream the right players, I think you can have a very successful season.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And like, I mean, that's a great pickup, Saka for Saar. But I think definitely agree with like planning ahead. And I think in recent seasons as well, I'm not entirely sure how this works on fan tracks, but with all the like doubles and blanks and stuff,
Yeah,
that's obviously key in normal FPL. Like if you're on the ball with these things, even if you haven't got a Kane, Salah, De Bruyne at the start of the season, there's so many
yeah.
points to be had just by 10 minutes of research a week and knowing when the deadlines are.
Exactly, exactly. All right. So I don't think we can talk about Fab too much because that's basically just a I want to say an added layer of complexity when doing waiver wire pickups and stuff. It's like, putting $1, $2 bids on players. Maybe some people will splash, because at the start of the season, you're given like, let's say $100 to spend. You're allowed to spend it in increments of $1, $2. For example, we had a waiver wire window that cleared today in our league, and somebody spent, I think, $70 on Hoyland, the new Manchester United striker, came in injured. Don't know what to expect. Is he going to start games in and out, right? So I think there's a lot of mixed strategies on how managers like to spend their money. I, for one, like to kind of keep my money spread it out throughout the entire season because when it comes to the back end of the season and people have no money left, you're in charge of the waiver wire pool, right? And if you can control that, that gives you a leg up for sure moving forward for the rest of the season. So in terms of maybe talking about buying low and selling high, what would you say are a couple of maybe Fulham assets that you could probably sell high at like the start of the season?
Well, that's a good question. So I think the strike situation, like we don't know who's going to be nailed on there. So there's definitely going to be some price increase depending on who does get the nod. It wouldn't surprise me if Jimenez, Vinicius price sort of shoot up if Mitro were to leave and we don't get a suitable
Yeah,
replacement in. I still
yeah,
stick by Wilson. I think Wilson is someone that can get goals early on and people really take note that he is an asset worth having.
yeah,
And like you said, I sort of agree with Bassi. Like, I think there's potential there, right? That if he is the nailed on centre back and is sort of picking up the odd goal, people take notice of these things. As soon as a
Yeah.
centre back gets a couple of goals, it's like, oh my god, I need him. So yeah, there's that, and I would just say as well, I definitely agree with the sort of mindset and strategy of conserving things and sort of seeing as how the season goes and how you need to pivot a little bit, because in all forms of FPL you see people go crazy at the start, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like they need to spend these things instantly, use chips, do whatever. And I think you really
Yeah.
see in the tail end the people that have like conserved things, probably the more
Yeah.
experienced managers, do well at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah, I mean, managers. You got to remember that the season is a marathon. It's not a race, right? So there's a long, long way to go, man. All right. Finally, another one I wanted to touch on. What do you think are some Fulham assets that you could probably buy low, who might not have a good start to the season, but potentially could explode in the latter half?
Also, I thought that was sort of what you meant before. So like I think that there's potential with Wilson, there's potential with Willie, and these people
Ah,
that
okay, okay, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
people won't be looking at maybe at the start, but if
Yeah,
their numbers look good, I do think in general though Fulham's opening fixtures really aren't great. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
wouldn't be strongly recommending people to buy with the intention of them suddenly surging. Um, so yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Definitely. Speaking of like the start of your season, right? Your fixtures: Everton away, Brentford at home. Then you've got Arsenal away, Man City away. But then you've got Luton at home, Crystal Palace away. So maybe after the first two fixtures, it's probably a good time to kind of sell high on assets before those tough two fixtures. But at the same time, with Luton at home, Crystal Palace away, that's also maybe a good time to time those Fulham assets as well, right?
Yeah, so like I think that first game against Everton could go either way. Like I honestly can't call it. And then a home game against Brentford is like all bets are off in a derby like that. It's going to be a fiery
Yeah,
one. City and
yeah,
Arsenal are basically write-offs. I will tell you now, we will not get a point there. We will not score a goal. And then the problem we've got is that Luton game is straight after the international break. So if we go
yeah.
into that Luton game and we're somehow on like 0 points or 1 point, there's a ton of pressure there, right? So it's going to be an interesting start, and I hope that we've got enough points going into that Luton game that we're not panicking. I think there's a lot of clubs, not just Fulham, that after 5 or 6 games, that's where you just don't panic. Probably like an FPL managing general, just don't panic and sort of
Yeah,
take stock. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, I think prices won't be surging before that Man City Arsenal game.
All right. So, final thing to ask you, Charlie. What would be some of your lessons learned as a drafting manager over the past few seasons that you would maybe take into the upcoming season, and maybe some advice that you'd like to share with the drafting community?
So I think from my experience in like standard FPL drafts, the takeaways I would sort of share are uh, don't overvalue goalies. That's probably number one. It's just like a waste of
Yeah.
your time. Just see who's
Yeah.
left and pick off from there.
Agreed.
Um, I think like stay level headed throughout the season and stay consistent. That would be my main thing.
Mm.
So like putting aside a bit of time before deadlines just to take stock and actually see how your strategy looks is always a good
Yeah.
idea. Um, and I think valuing form is a good strategy. And I think that's what sets apart really good managers from good managers is like having a plan 8 weeks ahead and sort of knowing
Mm.
fixture trends and form trends.
Okay, lovely. All right, listeners, those are the picks. That is the pod. That's a wrap, man. Charlie, thank you so much for giving us your Fulham knowledge, your time as well. I really appreciated the chat. It was a different angle, different take. I'm still gonna try and coerce you to join our Fantrax community. We'll see how it goes. But I mean, we would love to have you back on the pod later on in the season. Give us your Fulham updates. Even update us on how your season's going. We'd love to hear from you. If you're interested on staying on. But yeah, other than that, listeners, we're almost at the end, right? Episode number 19 in our Inside Track series. I can't believe we're almost there. We have one more club, Burnley. and it's definitely a doozy. But you know what? You'll just have to keep your eye out, keep your ears open, and we will catch you on the next episode. Peace.